Right now, your fingers know something your brain doesn't. They can find every letter on a keyboard in total darkness. They move 6 times a second without a single conscious thought. But if someone handed you a blank keyboard and asked you to draw where each letter goes, you'd probably get fewer than half of them right. That's not a flaw, that's the invention working exactly as designed. And it all started on June 23, 1868, in a converted mill in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when a newspaper editor named Christopher Latham Sholes handed the world something it didn't know it was waiting for. A machine that could translate human thought into printed words faster than a human hand ever could. He called it the typewriter. You've probably never stopped to think about how strange that is. For the entire span of recorded human history, if you wanted to communicate through text, your hand held a tool and your brain controlled every stroke. The speed of your thoughts was always faster than the speed of your fingers. There was always a bottleneck, a traffic jam between the idea and the page. Sholes didn't just build a faster pen, he broke that bottleneck. He changed the relationship between your mind and the written word, and in doing so, he quietly rewired the way humans think, remember, work, and feel to this day. But to understand why that matters, you have to go back to where it started. Sholes was not chasing glory, he was not trying to change civilization. He was a printer and newspaper editor in Milwaukee who was annoyed, specifically annoyed at how tedious it was to number the pages of books by hand. He built a small machine with his colleague Samuel Soule to stamp numbers onto pages automatically. That was it, that was the whole plan. But then a lawyer named Carlos Glidden walked into the machine shop one afternoon and asked a question that changed everything. He said, what if it could do letters too? Sholes spent the next 2 years consumed by that question. He built model after model, each one stranger than the last. The first version had piano keys, some ivory, some ebony. The paper rested flat on top like a table. It could only produce capital letters. It had no key for the number 1 because you were just supposed to use the letter L. Users couldn't even see what they were typing as they typed it. It was, by most accounts, ridiculous. But on June 23, 1868, the United States Patent Office issued patent number 79265. The typewriter was officially real. Now here's the part that gets interesting. The original keyboard layout was alphabetical. A B, C, D, straight through the alphabet in perfect order. Makes sense, right? That's how every schoolchild learned letters, that's how books organized words. Alphabetical seemed obvious. But then typists started getting faster, and the machine started falling apart. The typewriter's mechanism worked through metal type bars that swung up to strike an inked ribbon and leave a mark on paper. When 2 adjacent keys were pressed too quickly in succession, those type bars would crash into each other and jam solid. A jammed typewriter mid-sentence was infuriating. The faster the typist, the worse the jams became. Sholes solved this with a radical idea. He broke the alphabet apart. He studied which letter combinations appeared most often in English words and then deliberately placed those letters far apart from each other, slowing down the typist just enough to let the machine keep up. Q went to the top left corner. W and E and R and T and Y followed. Common letter pairs were scattered across opposite sides of the keyboard. It worked, the jams mostly stopped. What Sholes didn't know, couldn't have known, is that he wasn't just designing a keyboard for a machine. He was designing a keyboard for a brain, a layout that millions of people would one day burn into their muscle memory so deeply that they would know it the way they know how to walk. In 2013, a team of cognitive psychologists at Vanderbilt University ran an experiment that reveals just how deep that burn goes. They recruited 100 skilled typists and gave them a simple typing test. The typists performed exactly as you'd expect, averaging 72 words per minute, hitting the right key 6 times every second with 94% accuracy. Then the researchers handed them a blank keyboard diagram and 80 seconds to label every letter in the correct position. The average score was 15 letters out of 26. People who typed with near-perfect accuracy every single day could not consciously remember where half the letters lived. The psychologists called this automatism, the ability to perform complex, coordinated actions without conscious awareness or intention. Your fingers don't wait for your brain to give instructions. They've built their own private map, burned through thousands of hours of repetition into something deeper than memory, something closer to instinct. Here's what that means. When you type, two different systems are running at once. One system is thinking about what to say. The other system, the one that knows the keyboard, is running entirely on its own, in a layer of processing you have no direct access to. Scholes didn't just invent a faster writing machine. He invented a way to offload a whole category of mental work from the conscious mind. And that offloading changed everything about how humans produce language. Linguist David Crystal has spent decades studying how writing technology shapes the words humans choose to use. He's documented how the shift from handwriting to typing changed sentence structures, changed the rhythm of written language, and ultimately changed the kinds of ideas people felt comfortable committing to paper. Typing is faster and less physically fatiguing than handwriting. That lowers the psychological cost of expression. Ideas that might have seemed too long to bother writing out by hand suddenly became easy to record. Offices transformed first. Before the typewriter, a single skilled clerk could write perhaps 800 to 1,000 words per hour by hand. A trained typist in 1900 could produce 3,000 words per hour. Letters that once took days to compose and copy could be drafted and dispatched in an afternoon. The pace of business communication tripled almost overnight. But something else changed too, something harder to measure. The typewriter created a new class of worker, the professional typist, and for the first time in history, that worker was predominantly female. Before 1868, offices were almost entirely male spaces. The physical labor of writing, copying, ledgering was done by men called copyists, but the typewriter required no physical strength. It required quick fingers, precision, and speed. Businesses soon discovered that women were exceptionally well suited for the work and they were cheaper to hire. By the 1880s, typing was being actively marketed to young women as a path to professional employment. In 1900, roughly 77% of all typists and stenographers in the United States were women. The typewriter hadn't just changed writing, it had cracked open a sealed door. Now let's talk about the layout itself, because what Scholes built still lives on your devices right now, more than 150 years later. The QWERTY keyboard, unchanged in its essential design since 1873, you carry it in your pocket, you use it every single day, and here is the strange thing about it. It was designed around the limitations of a machine that no longer exists. The type bar jamming problem that forced Scholes to scramble the alphabet was solved decades ago. Modern keyboards, laptop keyboards, phone touchscreens, none of them have type bars. None of them can jam. The entire reason for QWERTY's peculiar arrangement evaporated long ago. And yet here it is. Researchers and inventors have tried repeatedly to replace it. The Dvorak simplified keyboard, patented in 1936 by August Dvorak, was designed from scratch using letter frequency data to put the most common letters under the strongest fingers. Studies found that Dvorak typists made fewer errors. Some studies found they typed faster. It didn't matter. QWERTY had already been burned into too many brains. The switching cost was enormous. Entire industries had trained their workers on QWERTY. Typewriters were built around QWERTY. Retrain a workforce that already knows how to type at 70 words per minute. Nobody wanted that fight. Economists call this path dependency. The idea that the choice made first, even if it wasn't the best choice, shapes all the choices that come after it. QWERTY persisted not because it was optimal, but because it arrived first and built up enough momentum that nothing could shift it. Your fingers, right now, are living proof of a decision made in 1868 to prevent metal bars from crashing together. And there is one more layer here, one more piece that makes the typewriter's story genuinely strange. Research published in the journal Cognition and explored by psychologist Kyle Jasmin found evidence of what's now called the QWERTY effect. Words typed predominantly with the right hand, which has more keys in QWERTY's layout, tend to be rated by people as more positive in emotional valence than words typed predominantly with the left hand. The physical ease or difficulty of typing a word, caused by the asymmetry of the keyboard, may subtly influence how we feel about that word's meaning. Think about what that means. The way you feel about certain words, the warmth or coldness you associate with them, may be partly shaped by which fingers you have to use to type them. A constraint Scholes built into his machine to prevent mechanical jams might be bending the emotional texture of language itself. Language that humans use to think, to love, to argue, to dream. On the morning of June 23, 1868, Christopher Latham Scholes received a patent for a machine made of wood and piano keys that typed only capital letters and couldn't even show you what you'd written. He sold the rights to it 5 years later for $12,000 and spent his final years in poor health, quietly improving a machine that had already escaped him. He never fully understood what he had made. He thought he had built a faster pen, but what he actually did was invent a new way for human minds to meet the page. He separated the act of thinking from the act of writing. He handed conscious thought to one part of the brain and gave the mechanical labor of letter production to another, a deeper, quieter part that works below the threshold of awareness. And that separation, that split between the thinking and the typing, is still running inside you right now. Tonight, when you sit down to write an email or a message or a note to someone you care about, your fingers will move across that keyboard without you telling them where to go. They will find every letter. They will form every word. And your conscious mind will be free to think only about what you actually mean to say. That is not nothing. That is not a convenience or a shortcut. That is a fundamental shift in what it means to be a thinking creature who communicates through text. Christopher Latham Scholes walked into a machine shop in Milwaukee with a numbering device and a question about letters. And right now, without knowing it, your fingers are still answering him.